We're in the final stages of the United States of America versus Sean Diddy Combs. The courtroom was a little crazy this week, so we're hearing closing arguments from the prosecution as well as the defense. And this week, we are also hearing from our final witness. This week, we'll also learn that Diddy is not going to testify on his own behalf and that the defense will rest its case in about 30 minutes or less. However, because this case is coming to a close, the defense as well as the prosecution are really trying to nail in the points of the charges and what they mean to each side. So, of course, we know that the prosecution has the burden of proof, and they must prove that Diddy is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in order for the jury to find him guilty. So that is what they are trying to prove with these racketeering charges, as well as the sex trafficking, manipulation, abuse, whatever the case may be. They are trying to prove all of these things through their case. So, are we ready for everything that we're about to hear? Because there's a lot that's going to go on. We're going to hear about predicate acts. We're going to hear about the breakdown of the RICO. We're also going to hear from the defense their breakdown of exactly why this isn't a RICO and the charges pertaining to it and the specific incidents that the prosecution are bringing up. So pull out your pens, pull out your papers, your notepads, whatever you might need. Buckle in, strap in, because this is the point of no return, courtroom clarity. We are on week 7 of the Diddy trial. Thank you so much for hanging out with us the last few weeks and tapping into this case. It has been a wild ride. Without further ado, here we go. By day 28 of the Diddy trial, prosecutors would identify over 40 different male escorts that Diddy and Jane had during freak-offs, Wild King nights, hotel nights, or whatever they're called. We've heard so many different names. With these events taking place from 2021 to 2024, with the most recent one happening in September of 2024 before Diddy's arrest. So, of course, we know that Diddy is saying that all of this was consensual. However, the prosecution, as well as a bit of what Jane's testimony is alleging, is that a lot of this was forced and it was coercion. So in terms of the witness stand, today the prosecution has one of their final witnesses, and it is Special Agent Cerciello, and he is the Homeland Security officer who has viewed hours and hours of freak-off footage. In addition to the freak-off footage, he has also viewed travel records, hotel invoices, money transfers, and other things that they're going to view during the case today. So according to the prosecution, of course, we know that a part of this is the RICO. And of course, with the RICO, they have to establish some kind of crime organization or enterprise. Who are they using as the people in Diddy's enterprise that they want to identify? Those people would be his chief of staff that they keep mentioning, Christina Karam or KK. Then also his assistants that we keep hearing. These are the people who have all invoked the Fifth Amendment because they've either dealt with drugs back and forth across state lines. They've set up freak-offs for Diddy, so on and so forth. Also, his travel manager is setting these things up. Also, some of his finance people, as well as his bodyguards who have also touched money and done money transfers. So we've heard about Raheem, who is one of his more recent bodyguards, and then one of his older bodyguards, D-Rock. We also know that he has also dealt with money for Diddy as well. So $5,000 at a time, dropping off cash here and there. And this money was to also pay for freak-offs, according to Jane and some of the other witnesses that have testified for the prosecution. So we get a glimpse into a text message that Diddy sent to a male escort service. He says, "Hey, in NYC, have entertainment for after midnight," and it's a question mark. So we know that he uses the phrase entertainment often with Jane, and we know that when he means entertainment, he's not talking about watching a movie. He's really talking about some prostitutes coming out or sex workers to have a freak off. We also see the transfer of cash between some of Diddy's bodyguards and Jane. So here is another message between one of his bodyguards. "Will be there in 10 minutes with the cash." That was a message to Jane. And then she said, "Okay, great. Room 508. Do you have a key?" There was also times where he was requesting a lot of baby oil. So he would text Christina Karam saying there's no more baby oil. He also sent her a voice memo at one point in time saying, "Hey, KK, there's no more baby oil." At this point in time, he asked for something upwards towards like 5 to 10 more bottles of baby oil just for that one night. It does appear, though, that Christina Karam did often try to save Diddy from himself. She, at one point, also sent him a text saying this when he was kind of going off the rails in September of 2023. "Next time you leave when you're randomly partying, you have to tell us. You can't Uber lit with guests. That's when bad shit happens. You know this. Puff, seriously, that is reckless. He responded and says, I love you to death, but you have to stop. But it seems like maybe he should have taken her advice. You have to stop doing this reckless shit because, look. Okay, so the other thing, remember, the prosecution is saying that P. Diddy was running this whole thing like a criminal enterprise, and he was also potentially using some of his bad boy or Combs enterprise funds to fund and fuel these freak offs. So during cross-examination, when Diddy's defense attorney, Tinny Garagos, actually gets up, she asks the special agent, she says, weren't some of these paid for from Diddy's personal account? And they're arguing that at this point in time. The defense would also bring up some text messages between Jane and one of the escorts, basically saying that Jane was also sleeping around with escorts and that she enjoyed the freak offs. So here was an exchange between her and Sly, who was one of the escorts that they often used. Jane's first message to Sly reads, I'm horny for you, put in deep in me. Then after that, she says, having wine, miss you. She also talks about some black dominatrix clothing that she's potentially going to wear, I'm assuming at the next freak off. Then she also says in another message, hey, cutie, how are you? And he writes back, he says, hi, I'm just getting back cooking from brunch. Then she says, I'm one of a kind, baby. And then she writes again and says, these pics, okay, if I fly you out, I'm so horny, I need you, I'm touching myself right now. So they're basically showing that, even though they're saying, yes, our client was freaked out, but she's also freaked out, is what they're trying to say as well. Again, there's more exchanges. When I tell y'all these text messages get crazy, the text messages get crazy. So there was another message where she says that she's basically hot for him. There's another message where Jane writes him and says, Daddy want to see mommy be bad tonight? Slide that D right up in me at the restaurant. She also tells him, I'm going to blow your mind tonight. Can't wait to lick your nipples. She's also talking to him about making a run to the sex store. Then she says, we can skip this, that, and the third. I need to head straight there. I also need to do my nails. He writes her back and he says, I effing love it. So what they're trying to establish also is that she didn't have a problem with freak offs. They are trying to say that she enjoyed her and Diddy's kinky relationship. But here's another interesting tidbit. Diddy also texts Rico Love at one point in time. And on this day, he texts Rico Love and he says, I'm horny as FUCCCCCK. And they said, who is he texting at that time? It says a man named Rico Love. Why would you be texting Rico Love that? Why would you be texting Rico Love that? Then Diddy texts Rico Love and says, the name of a hotel, let me know when you're there. And then he sends a voice memo and says, yo, what's the name and room number? Then he texts Rico again and says, room is Paul. Y'all know who Paul is, right? Paul is Diddy's trainer, also a man that him and Jane used to do freak offs with. So is Rico Love the man that she was looking at doing freaky stuff in Vegas? I'm thrown off. What is happening here? They didn't go into further detail after that. It's like they kind of just glazed over the whole thing with Rico Love. But what happened with this Rico Love thing? Why did he text him that? Was he doing freak offs with Rico Love? Anyhow, I don't know what's going on with that, but stay tuned. This is coming to a close and we have a lot more to cover. Day 29 is next. The prosecution rests, the defense rests in about 30 minutes. Diddy is not testifying. The defense is also asking for an acquittal because they said that the prosecution has not met the burden of proof in this case. We also have watched about 45 minutes, not we, but the jury, has watched about 45 minutes worth of freak off footage. All of this and more in day 29 of the trial. Also yesterday, am I tripping? Or did Diddy text Rico Love saying that he was hot and heavy and ready like a Little Caesars pizza? I don't know if I'm tripping or not. I know I read that. I know I read that, and they didn't go deep enough into detail for that for me. Huh? So let's begin here. In December 2021, Sly, the cook, we talked about him last week. We also talked about him yesterday. They brought him up a lot. I think that he was one of Jane's favorite freak-off stars. Anyhow, in December of 2021, Jane and Sly are texting, and y'all already know with this case, listener discretion is advised. It's always advised when it comes to the Diddy trial. If you don't know that by now, then what is you doing? Sly texts Jane and says, "That was the roughest sex we've ever had. I loved it." Then she texts him back and says, "Definitely one for the books. Damn, baby, you got me so hot. You want to come back tonight or tomorrow morning?" So these were messages that were read during the defense's cross-examination of the same special agent. These were read because, again, they are trying to establish that Jane was not just freaking off with Diddy in the freak-offs, but that she was a freak, period. The defense then showed that days later, she booked some of his flight arrangements. It says, "Hey, hun, here's your flight info. I'll have hotel info later on tonight. Excited to see you." They also displayed another message where Jane was texting Diddy and she said, "I'll never take you for granted." So, of course, now they're trying to establish some type of love between the two. Again, as it pertains to Jane, what the prosecution is trying to prove is that he coerced her by fraud, meaning that he was promising her vacations, money, love, all kinds of things. But in reality, the only way that she could obtain these things from him is if she was involving herself in these freak-offs with prostitutes. The defense is also trying to establish that Diddy's camp really didn't know about his freak-offs. Here's a message. So in a message from Diddy to Jane, he writes, "You find a place, ? I can't have KK know." So they're trying to establish basically like, yeah, he was on his own thing. Christina didn't know what he was doing most of the time, is what they're saying. They also showed a message of Jane asking one of the escorts, "Do you have Zelle?" So also, again, they are standing 10 toes down by saying, hey, Diddy never gave these escorts any of his own money from Combs Enterprises, Bad Boy Records, anything like that. If anything, Jane gave these escorts money or it was from his personal accounts. That's it. They're also trying to say that she set up her own freak-offs or her own hotel nights. Here's another text message. "Sorry for this late text. It's no rush. Let me know if you're up to coming to LA on a Saturday." That was to another escort. Then this one is even crazier work. She texts another escort and says, "This is a 911 freak emergency." So she's trying to see if they can come to a freak off and it's a 911 freak emergency. We also talked about this a few videos ago. Jane would also have specific things that she would request to be in the room, and Christina Karam would send it to the assistants, and Diddy's assistants would go pick up these particular things for freak-offs or hotel nights, and they would be in the room when they got there. So again, the prosecution is saying that Diddy used his influence as well as his workers, his employees, to fuel all of these freak-offs and these illegal activities to kidnap people, to commit arson, so on and so forth. At this point, once the defense is done, the prosecution rests. They're done. The defense then gets up. They make some very quick points. I'm going to say those points, but within 30 minutes, they were done. So the prosecution has called 34 witnesses in total. Okay? That is a large number. We have talked about 34 witnesses in total, y'all. I can't believe it my damn self. So 34 witnesses in total over the last 6.5, damn near 7 weeks. And at the end of this, Diddy's team is actually requesting an acquittal of their client. So if you know anything about these types of cases, this is what the main goal of the case is. The prosecution, who are the people that are bringing up the charges, the prosecution has something called the burden of proof. They have the burden of proof. So that means that they have to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. So that means that the people have to believe it and they can't doubt it in their heads. Exactly, like the evidence has to be laid out there. So what the defense is saying is, y'all haven't proved this case and he needs to be acquitted. Let him go. And here's why. The jury is no longer in the courtroom when this is said, but here is a quote from Diddy's attorney, Shapiro. So he says, the evidence does not establish that Mr. Combs conspired with any other person to violate the RICO statute. They failed to show that any other individual actually conspired with him to conduct the affairs of this 20-year purported criminal enterprise. So they're also saying, at the most, his employees probably went to go get, his little things for him here and there. They booked hotel rooms for him, but that's it. So here's another quote. They said the assistants set up and cleaned hotel rooms, but they didn't know much of anything about what went on in those hotel rooms other than they used a lot of baby oil and Astroglide. So his defense is also saying that with the RICO Act, you need an enterprise. It needs to be more than a group of people. You also need to establish that there has been a 20-year long conspiracy. They say you cannot establish that. There has not been a long conspiracy. Mr. Combs did not conspire with any other person. They're saying that you're saying that there's an inner circle of bodyguards. You guys failed to show that. You're also saying that he engaged in all of these crimes. He was dealing out personal quantities of drugs. All you're saying is literally Astroglide and baby oil. That's all we're hearing. Then they gave the example of his past assistant. They said Jonathan Perez even said hotel nights were personal time with a female. Then they go into also say even his sex parties with Cassie Ventura and Jane often involved sex with third parties. However, most of this was not booked by staff. None of this was booked by staff. It was brought to them by the girlfriends, and it brought them closer to Combs. They also mention about when Christina Karam and the bodyguards found out about P. Diddy invoking violence against Cassie Ventura. They said, although they did not help, it's not racketeering. They also said Jane even confessed to waiting until the assistants would clear out to begin freak-offs. His attorney also said there's no proof that KK knew or thought that these women were being coerced. She did damage control. There is evidence that Mr. Combs was lying to her. KK is supposed to be the main co-conspirator, but she only appears in March 2016, 12 years into the 20-year conspiracy. They also mention linking some of the crimes. They say there's no evidence between the breakup with Cassie in 2018 and the beginning of the relationship with Jane in 2021. Then they began talking about the bribery part. So they said that Diddy didn't want any negative press or anything from the police to happen. So this is what happened. He didn't want any police involvement. So instead, what he did was he contacted the people directly and he paid them money to kind of apologize and say that he was sorry instead of getting other parties involved. And that is why he was paying the money, not as a bribe. They say he was showing consciousness for his wrongdoing, not trying to intimidate or hinder delays of any type of crime. They also talked about D-Rock when he sent Mia all those text messages intimidating her, and she said that she felt scared and she was a little blown by how many times that he was checking in on her. They said that all of his messages were nice. He wasn't saying anything mean. So they're also saying there was no evidence D-Rock or Mr. Combs thought Mia felt threatened. So this is not witness tampering. Also, there's no proof that Mr. Combs knew of a federal investigation at that time in November of 2023. So there's also no way that he can witness tamper because he didn't even know that there was a trial to begin with for a witness to be tampered with. Also, in terms of corrupt persuasion, he was already paying Jane's rent since 2023. So there's no way that he could still be persuading her now because he was already paying her rent for the last 2 years. Also, to forced labor, they're saying that his employees could walk away at any time, and a lot of them actually did walk away at any time. So he wasn't forced to do anything. They also touched on kidnapping and a few other points, but his defense went in. However, there's so much more to unpack as they talk about what jury instructions will look like on day 30 of this trial. Stay tuned because the case is wrapping up. Okay, I know y'all keep hearing that, oh, they're dropping Diddy's charges. That's not true. Guys, that's not true. That's not true. They're streamlining it. They're making it simpler for the jury to understand. That's what's happening. It's getting streamlined. Okay? So let's break this down on what happened during day 30 before they get into closing arguments of the Diddy trial. Okay, so the charges that they're removing, this is a part of the RICO. The charges that they're removing or that they're going to have to explain are attempted kidnapping, attempted arson, in aiding and abetting sex trafficking. So here's a direct quote from the letter that the prosecutors wrote to the judge. They said the government is no longer planning to proceed on these theories of liability, so instructions are no longer necessary. So basically what they're trying to do is they don't want to confuse the jury. They don't want to have to be like, oh, okay, so what, attempted arson, and then also like, we have attempted sex trafficking and actual sex trafficking. They want to simplify it. They don't want them to have to second guess anything. They want to make it very matter of fact and direct. No, straight up arson, straight up sex trafficking. They want it very matter of fact. So we know that in order for the RICO to stick, they have to bring forth these predicate acts. So the predicate acts are basically like, if you think of like, think of a sandwich, and it's like the piece, like the ingredients inside of the sandwich that are sandwiched in between the bread. This is the re and the co. And inside of the re and the co, you need at least 2 pieces of ingredient that make the re and the co stick together. So if you want the re and the co to stick together, you need 2 predicate acts at least in the middle. They have 10 predicate acts that they're arguing that they need to stick. At least 10. They only need 2 in order for the RICO to stick, but the prosecution has 10. The main 2 now that they are proving or trying to prove in this particular case are now the forced labor and sex trafficking, okay? So they're kind of putting away with the arson situation and all that stuff, but they still are charging him with a lot of other stuff, y'all. So the notion that he's getting off or that he's gonna serve less time or whatever else, like he's still in some hot shit, okay? And this really comes after yesterday when on day 29, the defense argued that they didn't have a lot of this evidence that they were saying, that they didn't deliver the burden of proof as they thought they did. And this is what the defense was saying yesterday about Kid Cudi's car with arson. They were also saying this about Capricorn Clark being kidnapped. They also talked about this as it pertained to the enterprise with his workers and things of that nature. So remember, I said they have 10 predicate acts that they're going to present to the jury. The jury has to agree on 2 of these predicate acts in order to find Diddy guilty of the RICO. Okay, so here's some of the predicate acts: arson, bribery, witness tampering, forced labor, sex trafficking, and distributing controlled substances. And the other thing to note is with a lot of these, it's not as simple as it sounds. They're very loaded. So it like, for example, the jury's still going to have to consider the pattern of the racketeering activity, basically. So they're going to have to see, like, with the kidnapping or with the arson, was it arson? Was it an attempted arson? You know, was it aiding and abetting arson? Was it aiding and abetting kidnapping? Was it attempted kidnapping? Was it outright kidnapping? So it's kind of layers to it that they have to peel back an onion and see. And that is why the prosecution said, hey, we're going to simplify some of this and make it a little more easy to understand, because it is very loaded and there is a lot to understand. And we want this to be very simple and simplified for the jury to understand so that we can nail him. And that's basically what's happening. They're simplifying this. They're not taking really much anything off of the table, but instead simplifying the terms and what they're saying so that people understand exactly what it is they want to charge Diddy with. So they would hold a charge conference on day 30 of this trial. And so the charge conference was, some people from the press were there, but also, of course, the prosecution, the defense, and Diddy. The jury was not there. They were there, and they were off for the day. And during this, they were just going over adjustments of language of the instructions that the judge will give to the jury prior to deliberations. So this was a time for both legal teams to kind of add and subtract any necessary sentences, language that they thought was important for the jury to pay attention to or to know when the judge was giving out instructions prior to deliberations. So what's next? The closing arguments for the prosecution are expected to last most of the day on day 31. And then starting fresh on day 32, the defense will go with their closing arguments. So again, no charges have been dropped against Diddy. They've just been simplified, streamlined for better understanding of the jury. So closing arguments should be pretty interesting today. Where are we at? What are y'all thinking? Because this is coming to a close and this has been a long 6 weeks. 7 weeks? I'm starting to lose track of time. I don't know where we're at. But tell me what y'all are thinking about these charges and also just media in general. I think this is also an interesting way of like where you get and how you get your news. You know, guys, honestly, always look at more than one source. As a journalist myself, and I know that sometimes I get on here and I'm playing, I'm making faces and stuff, but really and truly, I went to school to be a journalist. At the end of the day, I have a master's degree in journalism and public affairs, and this is something that I take very seriously. I give you the news and I give you both stories, and I want you to come up with your own opinion of whatever it is that you think it is. Because I truly do believe in the power of whatever it is that's out there and people knowing what's out there and coming up with your own opinion. So really and truly, the headlines are what the headlines are, but always read for yourselves and know things for yourselves because the headlines are often wrong, y'all. I read so many times yesterday, Diddy's charges dropped, Diddy's charges dropped, Diddy's charges dropped. And I was like, what? And by the time I read the actual court document myself, I was like, the charges didn't get dropped. And this is also why y'all got to stay away from a lot of these like random neighborhood gossipy sites and stuff like that. Let me get off my soapbox. But saying that to say, please just consider your sources when you are looking at different topics and different things in the news. Yeah, so more to come with the Diddy trial, but love y'all. Holla at me in the comments. What are y'all thinking? I'm scratching my head again because this is crazy. As we are nearing the end of the Diddy trial, let's talk closing arguments from the prosecution as well as the defense. So the prosecution's closing arguments will last for about 4 hours, with prosecutor Christy Slavic delivering them. And here's a quote. For most of this, overarchingly, what she would talk about is the violence, power, and fear that Diddy used to get exactly what he wanted. And that is what they are saying is the basis of this case. And just a reminder on his charges, here's what he's facing. He is facing 2 counts of sex trafficking, 2 counts of transportation for prostitution, and 1 count of racketeering conspiracy. As to how he is pleading, he has pled not guilty to all of them. So I'm Amanda from the Point of No Return True Crime Podcast, and y'all already know for the last 7 weeks, we have been covering the Diddy trial. So if you've been rocking with us for the last 7 weeks, then you also know the 2 people at the center of this case are 2 witnesses, 2 key witnesses. Those 2 key witnesses are who? Jane, his ex-girlfriend, and Cassie Ventura, his other ex-girlfriend. We know that both of them testified and they had very similar stories in regard to nightly activities or parties that they would do with Diddy. And these parties would go by the names of freak-offs, wild king nights, hotel nights. Sometimes if they got extra freaky deaky, they were called all-star nights, and the list kind of goes on and on. So these nights are described as a time where they would go to a location, more than likely a hotel, and the girlfriend would more than likely also set up the night. When she would set up the night, she would then have intercourse with the escort that they set up with, and Diddy would watch from a corner while masturbating, but he would also direct the whole thing, down from when they could touch to when they could move to the next position, so on and so forth. Even when it was time for them to finally climax, ejaculate, whatever, that is also Diddy would like instruct them to do that and direct that as well. So the prosecution is also arguing that this was a coerced action. How is it coerced? They're saying that the coercion influenced financial control, violence, and threats of blackmail to release all of these explicit videos if the women didn't fall in line with what Diddy wanted them to do. So even though these stories were spread out, here's a quote from the prosecutor. She said, they're not separate stories, they're chapters of the same book. So even though, Cassie's story began in about 2009, ended in 2018, and then you have Jane, who was from about 2021 to 2024, she's saying that this was the same exact type of behavior from Diddy, allegedly. So the prosecutor also told the jury, she explained to them, in order for them to find Diddy guilty of sex trafficking, they just had to believe that each victim was pressured at least once into participating into at least one of these freak off encounters as a result of force, threats of force, or fraud or coercion. They also showed text messages where Cassie said no to Diddy about these freak offs, or where she didn't want to have freak offs anymore. However, these were ignored according to them. So they're saying that Diddy would use these freak offs and these tapes as a means to then throw it back on her and fraud her, coerce her, or blackmail her into then having sex with him and doing more freak offs. Because if the tapes got out, she would then be embarrassed. It would ruin her career, so on and so forth. So he was using these tapes to kind of, dangle it over her head as a carrot or whatever, to say like, aha, like, I have these tapes of you. So if you don't do what I want to do, then I'm going to release these. As it pertains to Jane, they said that Diddy started off Jane's relationship by love bombing her, buying her a lot of gifts, giving her a lot of attention, a lot of conversation, and then kind of pulling the rug from under her afterwards. They said this was a means to groom her, to keep her wanting more and coming back for more. So in Jane's case, they're saying that Jane was frauded. Diddy allegedly offered and said that he was going to do a lot of things for Jane that he ended up not doing in the long run. So some of these things may include like vacations, dates, things of that nature. However, as we also know, he pays for her rent currently, as well as her attorney that she used even in this case. Okay, and so they finally said it in black and white. We've been talking a lot about the criminal organization or the enterprise that they're trying to formulate, or that they're trying to say like, hey, this was the criminal enterprise and this is how they're going to get him on the RICO charge. Because I know that's a question that a lot of you had, like, how can they call this a RICO if he doesn't have a criminal enterprise? So this is where that portion comes in. According to the prosecutors, the group that consisted of the criminal enterprise would be Combs' chief of staff, Christina Karam, aka KK, that we've heard so much about, then several of his security guards, including a man referred to as D-Rock. We've heard so much about D-Rock. Then also relying on his younger assistants and people like that to buy him drugs. So this was another reason that a lot of his assistants, damn near 90% of his assistants that testified during this case, all invoked the Fifth Amendment rights. They all pled the Fifth because they knew that they were doing illegal shit while they were working for Diddy. Buying drugs, transporting drugs across state lines, doing all this other kind of stuff. So the prosecutor would then explain this to him, that in order to convict Diddy of a racketeering conspiracy, jurors had to believe that he and his employees agreed to commit two or more criminal acts. These could be two instances of the same crime or two separate crimes altogether. Now, in my personal opinion, I think this is where it's going to get a little tricky, because I think people were doing these crimes for Diddy on their own volition. Like, I think he very well knew like these were criminal acts, but I think people wanted to keep their jobs. I think people were afraid of him. And so I think people just did things. I don't think, however, outside of maybe KK, that a lot of people were in cahoots with him, especially his assistants. They seemed like they were also a little afraid of him, especially with how temperamental he was. And the prosecutor even had a similar statement to back this up. So she said that a lot of these crimes, Diddy didn't commit them himself, but he had other people to do it for him, like his employees. So the direct quote is, everyone was there to serve him. He doesn't take no for an answer. Okay, so as to some other charges, like transportation of prostitution, they are saying, and this is a part of the RICO. So the prosecutor is saying that The evidence that they provided is that there is a significant amount of evidence that Christina Karam knew exactly what was happening in those hotel rooms and that she facilitated travel for escorts to cross state lines. Escorts, sex workers, prostitutes, however you want to put it. And also, she was ensuring that Diddy was giving them thousands of dollars at a time by facilitating the cash transfer or whatever the money transfer may be as well. Because he would request for her to get the money for the hotel nights and give it to, whoever his girlfriend was at the time, to then give it to the workers. Okay, another interesting part was the forced labor portion. And this is also embedded in that RICO, one of the predicate acts. So in terms of forced labor, one of the things that they're using when we're thinking about forced labor, we're probably thinking about a regular 9 to 5. But no, in this particular case, the forced labor that they're talking about is sex. So what they're saying is Diddy would force Jane and Cassie for days on end to stay at these sex parties and sex it up for hours and hours and hours on end against their will. To the charge of witness tampering, they also said that because of the civil case, Diddy probably knew that a federal case would soon be following. So he tried to hush up or talk to people, whoever he could. And that is why he reached out to Mia and was consistently harassing her, according to her. So because of that, he was trying to neutralize people that he felt would do the most harm in these cases. And that was the words that they used, neutralize. So that was a part of the witness tampering portion of the prosecution's closing argument. Here's one of the last things that she said. Up until today, the defendant was able to get away with these crimes because of his money, his power, and his influence. That stops now. It's time to hold him accountable. So, after we've heard everything that we've heard in the last 7 weeks about Sean P. Diddy Combs and the crimes that he has allegedly committed against all of these women and all of the witnesses that have come forward and said what they've said, what do we think? Was he in a criminal organization with his workers? Like, what's the tea? What are you guys thinking? Up next, the defense's closing arguments. Will you call Diddy and Cassie's relationship a modern day love story? That is what Diddy's defense attorney, Mark Agnifilo, called Diddy and Cassie's relationship during his closing arguments during the Diddy trial. So we are in week, I don't know. Is this week 7? Is this week 8? It's day 30 something. Honestly, the days are running together, but we are nearing the end and the jury is about to get their instructions and go into deliberations very, very soon. So what we're going to hear now is the closing arguments from the defense. There's a lot that they're defending and a lot that they're unpacking. They tried to get an acquittal. It didn't go through. So here's exactly what happened. But before we jump into that, something interesting that we haven't seen since the beginning of the trial, since week 1, all of Diddy's adult children were there for the closing arguments. Also, Fahim Muhammad, his lead security guard that we've heard a lot about in testimony this week and last week, he was also in court as well with Diddy's family and Diddy's mother. So the defense is saying that, hey, we know that he didn't look the best in these videos. We know that he beat up Cassie. We're not negating the violence. However, what we are saying is that he was into a swingers lifestyle. And he even told Jane that he was polyamorous. There's messages. She read it. He was into polygamy, and that is that. They also discussed how some of his previous workers said very positive things about him. They made it very clear they didn't always like him or love him, but they did have really positive feedback, to the point that a lot of them even got advanced or wanted to come back to work for him, i.e. people like Capricorn Clark or even Don Richard. These are 2 people specifically that had very vile things to say about Diddy. However, in the last 4 to 5 years, after the crazy things that allegedly happened to them happened, they were still willing to go back and work with Diddy after the fact. His attorney even said something along the lines of, Diddy was practicing diversity, equity, and inclusion, known as DEI, before it was even a mandated practice. This is something he was doing on his own in 1993 as a 24-year-old man by himself. They also said that Diddy is a provider. He likes to take care of people. It's very evident, and it was evident through his relationship with people like Jane. They said that Diddy paid for her home and is still even currently paying for her home where she lives with her child. So then here's a sarcastic note. And a lot of this, honestly, in my opinion, was a little snarky and sarcastic. But here it is, and you'll see why. I hope she's having a good day. But you know where she's doing it in a house that he's paying for. That was the quote from Diddy's defense attorney. He even made a joke about some of the raids that happened at Diddy's houses. So he said the streets of America are safe from the Astroglide. And they got all the baby oil. They found the personal use of drugs. They did it. It's all worth it. Thank goodness for the special response team. They found the Astroglide. They found the baby oil. They found the 5-volume pills. Way to go, fellas. He also said that this case was simply about money. He said Cassie Ventura sued Sean P. Diddy Combs for $30 million because Sean Combs has $30 million. He said this investigation came out of that civil case. No $30 million, no lawsuit. No $30 million, no lawsuit, no criminal case. That's why we're here. We're here because of money. They were also saying that Cassie could have left at any point in time, that Diddy did not hold her hostage. He said that she was always free to leave. She chose to stay because she was in love with him. She left in 2018 with no pushback from Diddy. Here was another quote when talking about Diddy and Cassie's sex life. She's a woman who actually likes sex. Good for her. She's beautiful. She should. She's intense. She's unafraid. They also brought up her relationship with Kid Cudi, and they said that Cassie played Kid Cudi and Diddy at the same time. They were also bringing up the fact that they thought that Cassie was a liar. They said she lied to him for a very long time, over and over and over, as she had another relationship with another singer-songwriter under his nose. She was not afraid of him. They even referred to her as a gangster because they said that she had a burner phone, and because she used her burner phone to contact Kid Cudi, that, this made her a gangster somehow, because she was trying to lie to both men. And I guess that's implying that she was a gangster. Although Cassie had already said she wanted to talk to Kid Cudi and she had the burner because she wanted to be safe, because she knew that Diddy was crazy, in her opinion. They also spoke about Capricorn Clark as saying that she was never kidnapped. However, she did have some kind of obsessive romantic relationship that she wanted to happen with Diddy that never happened. She wanted to be more than platonic friends. And this is another reason why she kind of turned on Diddy or started making things up, allegedly. Going back to Kid Cudi, they talked about the arson. They said there's no evidence that he had anything to do with the Porsche. They also addressed Diddy's bribery charges, saying that Diddy didn't bribe anyone. This is as it pertains to the Intercontinental LA in 2016, when Diddy gave Eddie Garcia that $100K, and he basically made him sign an NDA and told him, don't talk to anybody about it. So in March of 2016, Diddy gave $100K in cash to Eddie Garcia, who worked at the Intercontinental LA at the time, and he gave him this money because they wanted the footage back from when Diddy dragged Cassie down that hallway. So here's their explanation. They said they are saying by law this is not bribery because Diddy paid him to avoid bad publicity. It's not a bribe under relevant law because there was no law enforcement investigation, and Diddy wasn't trying to hinder a law enforcement investigation. So the prosecution also only called 2 men to the stand that Cassie had intercourse with. And the defense wants to know why. They wanted to know why almost all of the men who allegedly had, any type of intercourse with Cassie or with Jane weren't called to the stand, why they didn't testify, because the ones that did testify actually weren't brought across state lines. So why were they interviewed and why were they on the stand as witnesses is what they were trying to figure out. And here's another interesting thing about the co-conspirators, which I thought was very interesting. Still think is very interesting. His defense attorney brought up that no other co-conspirators were indicted with Diddy, and that the government doesn't have any co-conspirators who testified to prove the racketeering conspiracies. So he specifically called out the government for not calling any witnesses in Diddy's inner circle, including Christina Karam, who we already know is Diddy's chief of staff. Not even the security detail, nobody. So his defense attorney described Christina Karam as a helpful employee that everyone loved. So to end it, his defense attorney told him that the right thing for the jury to do would be to acquit Diddy of the charges against him. He is not a racketeer. He sits there innocent. Return him to his family, who have been waiting for him. So next up is jury instructions. The jury will get instructions on exactly what it is that they need to determine in order to find Sean P. Diddy Combs either innocent or guilty of these crimes. So this very well may run into the July 4th holiday. It may go before. We're not sure. But best believe if there's some news that comes out, I got y'all. So hit me up. Let me know if you have any questions about anything or are intrigued about something specific, or if you're wondering something, I got you. I too am trying to figure this out. So yeah, until next time, let me know what y'all are thinking per usual. Don't forget, if you want a recap of this whole entire week and every single last thing that we've talked about, not only are we on TikTok, but we are also streaming anywhere you get your podcast. So that includes Apple Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon. The list goes on and on. Anywhere that you listen to your podcast, you will find the Point of No Return True Crime Podcast with Mandy and Mitch. I'm Mandy. Until next time, I will talk to you guys soon. Later.